Good afternoon, Aristo.
Good morning, Ron. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very fine. I was a little late, but I got here, and I hope this time the sound is going to be crisp and clear for people.
Well, without the pictures, we are going to have a better bandwidth, so it should be much easier to understand, and we'll experiment with it, but I think this is the way we need to go on our conversation.
Okay. A lot of people, have audio programs, and the radio programs that you listen to, there's no real need for pictures. People can concentrate on the sound better. This material is a little more sensitive than the previous material because it gets into more esoteric topics. These topics are not off the top of my head. They're not completely alien to people, especially those with some kind of esoteric orientation or New Age beliefs or whatever. But I'm going to do my best to explain them in a slightly different manner and make them more clear for people. I want to begin today's discussion with a comment that I fell upon when I was listening to your own video today, where you talk about if not now, when, if not us, who. Somebody basically, and this is a classic response. And so classic that, some might say, why are you even considering, dwelling on it? But I think it's important because it's in the back of everybody's head on some level. So this guy says, we're all deluded. Heaven and hell states still exist depending on who you are and where you live. The New Age is just an industry making cruel promises to string gullible, deluded people along. Do you honestly think people suffering give a fuck about Lionsgate energies or planetary Merkabahs? No, they don't. It's pure crap that yields nothing. So this is a classic response that basically has no purpose other than to put people into despair, unless you're able to stand in your own truth and not be afraid of discerning into these things. New Agers are essentially dwelling on a sense of weakness when they say that they cannot handle negativity, or that when you focus on negativity, it's going to multiply and dominate. And we've talked about this. So the thing is that I agree with this person. I mean, it's like, well, I'm not afraid to agree with this person because we are all deluded. It's just that these are all half-truths. How much are we deluded? We're not all deluded to the same degree, and many of us are taking steps to move out of our delusion. Heaven and hell states indeed still exist depending on who you are and where you live. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there are no paradise states. Heaven is a state that's not grounded all on its own. When it comes and grounds into the earth state, it becomes a paradise, a tangible paradise possibility. Hell states, of course, are here. Most of us are experiencing purgatory states when we're not completely tortured or dying or whatever. Hell is a state where there is no hope. As long as you sustain a sense of hope, which is a sense that that your existence is meaningful in some way, and hence is moving somewhere positive, then you are not really in a hell state, you're in a purgatory state. You are purging and transforming. So the push is that the purgatory state is actually all going to hell in a handbasket, when that's not quite true. Purgation is just as intense as hell sometimes, only there is hope left, and there is a sense that purgation means that things are transforming, that things are being burned out in one sense, catalyzed in another sense, so they can move. Now, the New Age is just an industry making cruel promises to string gullible, deluded people along. But these people that I'm talking to and that you're talking to are not some abstract corporation called the New Age. This person is actually engaging in corporate thinking when he clumps all of these ideas of hope and spirituality and whatever into New Age thinking. I don't give a fuck about Lionsgate energies or the way other people translate these planetary Merkabah things, or the way they say, the meteors are going to fall or this is going to happen. We cannot be clumped in the same category. This is not a religion. Now, why do I say this in the context of all the material that I'm going to express today? First of all, when you engage in the 5 principles of ego bolstering or ego strengthening that we mentioned in the first video, which, to reiterate, are non-violence, which is basically reverse dogmatism or releasing self-righteousness that leads to violent behavior or polarization with other people. It has nothing to do with neutrality. It's basically a sense of discerning and not being attached to the rightness, the sense of rightness that puts you above and beyond anybody else. And then this leads to being genuine because you have no dependency on pretentious dogmas or ideas or programs in that sense. And then this leads to integrity because somebody who's genuine automatically moves into an appreciation of integrity, of not hurting other people, of not stealing, of not whatever, because like what you say about the OPPT, they begin to recognize their own value. The Yoga Sutras say that upon the established grounding of integrity, every precious gem is close at hand, because you recognize your own value, and every precious gem is a reflection of it. Now that leads into being a creative, natural individual who isn't afraid of their own sensuality, who isn't afraid of what creativity means, who isn't afraid of taking creative risks, and thus one is empowered with vitality. And this leads into a steadfast release of the grasping attitude, of being able to relax in terms of life's, what life throws at you or doesn't throw at you or whatever. And this allows you to understand the nature of cause and effect much more deeply because you're not busy freaking out or being tense. You're still dealing with fear, you're still dealing with all of that, but you're able to understand causes behind it. So then you shift into a different mode of, okay, now I feel strong enough that I'm able to orient toward my inner self, my deeper being, which is a source of much greater strength. Now, anybody who says that all of this is bullshit, all of the esoteric attitudes are bullshit, has not experienced that sense of inner strength in the least. And so they say it doesn't exist just because they haven't experienced it. All of the rest of the stuff may be bullshit, a lot of it may be bullshit, but the power and potential of the deeper center of our being beyond the individualized ego framework and personality, and especially beyond the programming, all of that is something that one needs to get some sense of experience from it in order to appreciate its potential. And so these are simple guidelines to lead somebody, and not dogmatic, but there's something anybody can improvise upon, shall we say, to move them toward that direction. It doesn't take much effort in the beginning. But as you move on, if you begin to appreciate what it has to offer, the commitment that you will embody is something that comes naturally out of your own integrity and your own authenticity. If you don't feel that, then, there's no obligation, so to speak. And there's no need for it because enough people, as many people as are needed, these will be the people that are triggered in this direction. Everything is working naturally. It's not a matter of, if we don't meet a certain quota, it's all going to go to pot. So, and when you also said in your video, you don't know how it's going to happen. Well, there's one thing I've observed, and that is that organizations, if there are any that are really, really making a difference, most of them are under the radar. And they may pop out later or whatever, for better or worse. What I'm seeing, however, is that activities, detailed, synchronistic activities of the right people being at the right place at the right time are increasing. When you have a general intention of things progressing for the better, then you have more instances of people being at the right place at the right time to prevent bad things from happening and to initiate good things happening. One example is whistleblowers, even though that may be controlled. The thing is that things are getting so bad in terms of the environment especially, they're getting out of control of the psychopaths. And because they're psychopaths, they don't want you to know about it, especially, but even amongst themselves, shows of weaknesses would get them, there's competition in their ranks, so to speak. In any case, you're not going to hear any of this on the media, and if it's something very, very important that the psychopaths think is going to threaten them, nobody's going to be talking about it, or else their lives are going to be in danger. Otherwise, it's within the margin of error, so to speak. But that doesn't matter. One can still observe as one's abilities strengthen, as one's intuition strengthens, because the first thing that comes online is your intuition, is the voice that's deeper, that defies the program. So, as you move toward appreciating the sense of the higher or inner self, of your anointed being, you essentially develop a sense of necessity for psychic and physical hygiene. Your physical and your psychic, you clean your aura, you clean your house, you clean your body in a certain way that's much more mindful. You move energies around, sensations, and all of this. And this leads to a kind of harnessing dynamic that allows you to appreciate the present moment more, because you don't have as much clutter. So what's left is the natural sense of the present moment. And this begins to build. What I'm saying with all of this extended review is that every stage that I've expressed is the energy that moves you, or the awareness state that moves you into the next stage. You will naturally begin to recognize it. And the value of this mapping is to help you recognize the natural shift that is occurring into a sense of readiness for the next state. And they overlap, and there's no I finish this and begin the next, in any kind of boundary layer or something between them. You do this naturally. So as you move to appreciate the present moment, you notice the aliveness of things. You shift away from the despair. And it's easier to do that when you're not hounded by the cops, or they're not taking your property, or you're not in a concentration camp. But still, most people that will be listening to this message are not in those acute states. But even if they are, a little bit helps. Every little bit helps. And they have nothing to lose by pursuing this orientation. And this is not New Age bullshit. This is something that's far older and far more tried and true. Only the Matrix has taken great lengths to invalidate it in the minds of humanity. So inner passion then begins to manifest, and then you notice all along these stages, toward only at this stage do you actually start appreciating the sense that commitment is necessary. It's not something that you should do out of duty, or even the word shouldn't come into it, shall we say. It's basically something that you feel, okay, well, it's like working out. If I want to actually, get results, I need to invest in this. Which is the same thing with the economic dynamics. It's like our value is a means and an aim toward investment. So investing in yourself means cultivating an inner passion, because the seed is already there. If you've come this far, the seed is there, and this is a feeling. And this inner passion in any kind of esoteric activity, just like the inner passion in any kind of exoteric activity, is what fuels it and moves it forward. If you're just doing this half-heartedly, then it's not going to work. And it's like a relationship. If you're in a relationship half-heartedly, or, what does the other person say? Well, commit to it. It doesn't mean to force yourself. It means, do you recognize the value of this or not? So as you recognize the value, value recognition and commitment go hand in hand on all levels of activity, whether it's the economic, the social, the political, and the esoteric. So as you do this, you notice yourself more. You start studying yourself. Instead of being preoccupied with what other people are doing, you're going to have your hands full looking at your own responses, looking at where they're coming from, looking how you're dealing with the previous phases without getting caught up in dramas. And then you're able to notice that there is something deeper in all of this. And your yearning for the inner self, even though if you have no clue what it is, begins to give you a different sense, a recognition that there is something else. And this leads you to the evaluation that, okay, the best way that I can connect with this is if I completely open up to it. Commitment is the active portion of it, and receptive embodiment is the other side. It's the feminine side of it, so to speak. And so this alone, we could just stop talking here, and this alone would probably lead people to enough of a connection they could begin to get guidance, because guidance is essentially what the inner self gives us. And along with guidance, it gives us the integration, the guidance toward more integration, so our abilities can activate. Abilities do not just come from the inner self. They're basically a result of a greater integration dynamic. So, from here on in, we go into 5 more steps that are basically, as you begin a state of being where you're completely committed and receptive, from here on in, you move into something that's far more, that's even more specific. So, the third dynamic, because these 10 points, basically, 5 and 5, are all clumped into 2 stages. The third stage is known as standing or stance or posture. What is your general posture now? Because as all of these 10 stages coalesce, you're establishing the stance, you're establishing your attitude, you're establishing your general posture, and this posture is the posture of the whole. Oh yeah, if you do have something to say and interject, because I can't see you, so I don't know if you're actually wanting to say something. But otherwise, I'll continue.
I'm just going to let you continue.
Okay, thank you. The standing is basically the result of all the previous, because somebody would say, well, what do I get from all of this? Well, you get this all-important thing called a psychophysical stance, your attitude. This is where your strength is. You can have this analogy with martial arts, where when you begin any encounter, confrontation, whatever, or exercise, the stance is the most important part, because this is where, see, what I got from your talk with Peter van Runt about neutrality was, instead of neutrality, I would use a stance of balance, of equilibrium. Basically, when you approach anything, you need to find your balance, your equilibrium in relation to it. That way you're not, basically, you're the pivot of action, and you are not subject to polarized forces. And
I like that.
It's very, very important in anything. I mean, physical analogies are also very, very important, but of course, the establishment, and maybe rightly so, you can take this and interpret it in terms of the yoga that most people do. This Hatha yoga is based upon the interpretation of this specific line in the Yoga Sutras. Basically, asana, which means the stance. These are all the postures that people do, the stretches, the stances, and all of this. And this is one way to interpret it. But in its deepest essence is your basic psychological and physical, because the body-mind here at this point, you're not talking of just, well, the body, or my mind, or this mind. You're entering into a state where you're recognizing the body-mind as a single thing. We don't have one word for it, so we put these 2 words together. And you can actually say the spirit, the body-mind spirit, or the body-mind-spirit energy. You begin to notice that you're being, the separations between the aspects of the chariot are not real, that there's a flow between them and that they all flow into each other. And this is part of the result of the self-observation and all of this, and it moves. But the more you embody the inner self, the inner being, the more you affirm that it's in your life without having to fake it. But you're noticing your feelings are different, and you're being able to discern the differences from what the matrix does. So what you're doing now is separating from the matrix. And as you do, you notice that your equilibrium before, however you define it, was false. It was a false equilibrium defined by matrix programs. And at this point, you realize, well, I can't take anything for granted, which means that no matter what even the fact that the sun rises in the east is something that I cannot really take for granted. I don't have to go into a state of paranoid doubt or whatever. It's simply a state of I don't have to have everything guaranteed. I can just examine it. I'm beginning to cultivate a discernment. Anybody's conclusions are beside the point, because my discernment can always examine and test them. And so I can circulate them, and this is an ability that takes time to cultivate. But I see it progress. I feel it progress, so I don't have to be worried about it. There's enough things to worry about. One thing the Yoga Sutras do say is that there is one form of suffering that yoga can very easily eliminate, and that is the suffering of what might be. What might be causes anxiety, causes suffering. Okay, this is going to happen. Oh no. If we can just eliminate that out of the picture and not worry about it, we can deal with what is happening. And maybe we can deal to heal with what did happen. What is happening is basically our healing. But at the same time, part of that is still reflecting afflictions in all of this. So we can learn to tap into greater resources, just like this connection. Basically, you can probably, hopefully, hear the sound much better than before because we're not dealing with the unnecessary video. I mean, I'm just moving around and, well, it's good. You know how I look like, but from then on, it's not necessary. So the purpose of the communication can now be concentrated into the audio, and thus this is strengthened. So when we take away our attention from unnecessary things, and denial is not something we need to resort to it for this, because denial is basically completely not only unnecessary but unhealthy. We can still be, when you're in integrity and authenticity, you do not engage in denial. So that's been covered. So psychophysical standing is just one point, and I'm going to stick to that point because it's very, very important. And the sutras basically say that when you attain it, from the result of all of those things, you can condense it into your general stance, you attain the joy of grounded equilibrium. Grounded equilibrium is what I believe Peter van Runt was trying to describe when he talked about neutrality. Grounded equilibrium, basically, I am here. It's not a matter of being neutral with relation to anything. I have my stance, it's what it is, but it's balanced, it's not swayed. And then I can take in the world and what's going on, and I'm still not being swayed. I'm walking toward a choice. I say, well, there's right and there's left, okay? I can do either or I can do both in some way. I can choose a middle path, but either way, I don't have to be impartial in relationship to anything. All I have to be is authentic, discerning, open, and being able to understand what the hell is going on. Being clouded by preconceptions is something completely different, I don't consider neutrality being the result of not being clouded because I still have desires. I mean, a lot of these, there's a deep imprinting from these whole spiritual paths and the New Age and the Old Age, and we've talked about this before, of it, not just escapism from the physical world, but escapism from the emotional world, escapism from anything that might be considered impure. And that's basically a sign of impatience, a sign that you don't accept yourself, a sign that you're basically not willing to enter a situation because you're afraid it's going to hurt you. And I'm not saying to deny all that, but I'm saying that once you recognize that this is the cause, then you can take actual steps that are sane and mature in relation to it. Withdrawing and pretending that it doesn't affect you at all, a stance. You don't need, the scientists that solve problems in the most creative manner are not the ones that are neutral in relation to the problem. I have to disagree on that. They're the ones that are most passionate about the problem. They're the ones that have invested interest in the problem being solved in the sense of an emotional connection with the implications and with what the problem is all about. We tend to think of scientists, you have the scientist view of being a nerd, of impartial, of not carrying cold, but when that nerd is involved in what really turns them on in terms of what they're doing, and there's not too many of them actually, but when it does, you see a completely different person. If that person could be as passionate with a woman as he is with his scientific obsession, the guy would be a Don Juan, he'd be, the so-called nerd stereotype wouldn't have a problem. They'd blow away jocks and everybody else, because it's that kind of passion.
The Revenge of the Nerd, did you ever watch that movie?
Oh. Yeah, he watched it when it first came out, But it's exactly that, it conveyed that kind of thing. In that movie, the nerds basically, people who were neutral and impassive and intellectual, shifted their sense of passion from what nobody else could understand to fields of activity that they were not confident they could handle before. And they succeeded. And it was because of their stance of balanced equilibrium. Now, I'm not saying, of course, most of the psychopaths are based on the whole intellectual, cold intellectual and all of this. But that's a whole controlling aspect. I'm talking about the deeper dynamic of approaching anything creatively, because passion is passion on any level. Physical, emotional, intellectual, it's a continuum. And as you integrate yourself, one of the things you notice is that passion basically does not discriminate between physical, emotional, intellectual. It's the same thing. And so then you notice that your deeper self also comes into why should it be just spirit? I mean, why should it be all over there? Oh, that's the higher up in heaven or whatever. We're grounding heaven on earth, which means we're recognizing something that is potentially already here. We're not paying attention to it. We're not cultivating it, but the seed is here. If the seed of heaven were not on earth, then heaven would never be able to be grounded. It's not a matter of pulling something down, but it's a matter of resonance. Resonating something that's already in the earth in order to couple with heaven in a resonating dynamic, and that is within us. So the sutras go on to say that this grounded equilibrium of your stance arises from the integration of all-pervading relaxation and fully committed effort. So this is a paradox. I mean, how can you be committed when you're completely relaxed? Most people associate passion and commitment. First of all, they associate commitment with work. You got to work at it, which means that's labor and stress and hurt and being forced to do something that you really don't want to do. The whole 9-to-5 matrix definition.
Oh, and by the way, you're at 29. You're past. You're 26 and a half, going on 27 minutes. Just
okay.
Give you a time thing.
Thank you very much. We don't have much more to say here, but the whole thing is that please meditate on this, or think about it at least, this paradoxical integration of all-pervading relax. And that doesn't mean being limp. It means the same thing as your hand being cupped. Relaxed, but able to act. Again, martial arts base their philosophy on this integration dynamic I'm describing. So therefore, if you want to be liberated and immune from conflicts and the polarization of dualistic or dueling views, this psychophysical stance that you're attaining as a result of these 10 steps is a culmination where you're recognizing in your emotions, in your body, in your muscular armoring, how it moves, in your intellect, and in your intuition. This is the way to go about it. So this is my answer, synchronistically speaking, because it was the next thing along the way, to Peter van Runt's discussion on, and I'm not disagreeing with the guy essentially, but it's my way of describing the whole neutrality thing. And from that here on, we're going to move into what is called life force expansion, life force circulation. Now there's one tiny thing, it's going to take a minute, that in order to bridge the gap between life force and your stance, connecting into your center of mass physically, which is your navel, basically, your navel area, as you walk, as you breathe, just the simple act of taking a deep breath or breathing and noticing your breathing, but not noticing the breathing, noticing the sensations of the breathing. So you can just forget about the breathing eventually, and instead of saying, well, I'm conscious that I'm breathing, you're saying, I'm conscious of these energy flows that result from my breath. And that if you can focus this and stimulate the neural net in your abdomen, then you can take all of these dynamics that we've described, and your body will incorporate them into its own deprogramming and intelligence, which is very, very important and forms a foundation for the next step I will describe in the next week, which is what people call energy work. So that is what I have to say for today. I hope we have not gone over 30 minutes.
No, actually, we're not. And if it goes a little over, I'm good with that. I mean, I like to keep it around 30 minutes, but it's around. Last week we went longer than I would have preferred, quite honestly.
Yes.
But it was bad video and bad audio. But
well,
I want to just say, Aristo, this neutrality thing has really, I mean, I've spent a lot of time pondering that, because I like Peter a lot, and yet all of these spiritual people, including Peter, are saying, well, you've got to reach a place of neutrality. I think you summed it up really nicely in saying it's not neutrality, it's balance. I really think that that's the key to understanding this and getting a grasp on it that makes sense. Because the neutrality doesn't make sense to me.
It's Switzerland. It's when everybody's having a war, you're not involved, basically. It basically implies that you're not participating in what's going on. So maybe
Except
it's not
the finances.
Exactly. And it's like, well, it's the word. Okay, let's change the word. Well, let's look at what we're trying to say with this neutrality. I mean, my thing was that it's grounded equilibrium. It's not just balance. I mean, people need to notice their emotional biases with respect to what they are talking about. They need to notice what they really mean, and is there a hidden motive when they're saying something? And spiritual people especially. The problem with people with a spiritual orientation is that escapism comes so naturally that they don't even know that they're doing it. You know, even in tiny little details, the little details just keep accumulating of, well, I'm avoiding this, we can't do that because that's going to lead to a negativity. And so a tiny compromise is made with their authenticity that they're not observing. And so they move to another compromise and another one, and then you end up with these concepts of, well, I can't touch anything. And the psychos know about this, the psyop people, the psychologists of the institutions, they know about this, and they develop a pseudo-New Age movement that, you know, paid and who knows what, of people who cultivate these ideas, that confuse people, sincere people, even more. And it's not the obvious stuff. It's the stuff that sounds, I mean, if it's the obvious stuff, there's nothing to worry about. The stuff that's really bullshit that you could tell. I mean, this is the stuff that sounds really, really sincere and that creates controversy where even 90% of the people can support somebody that's a very, very clever bullshitter. My point is to be able to, even the bullshitter is going to have to give you some truth in order to be believable. Well, get their truth, claim their truth, and throw the rest out the window along with them. It doesn't matter what their motives are as long as you can separate the wheat from the chaff. And so grounded equilibrium is the way to do this. Balance also has a few biases in the sense that it's static. I'm here and I'm not moving and I'm balanced and I'm fine, and if I move I'll lose that balance. A dancer has grounded equilibrium. Life, chemists and physicists, they'll tell you life is defined as dynamic equilibrium. Order is a constant state of balance that's always shifting. You're moving from, a dancer is always in balance. They'll never, otherwise they'll fall and be clumsy. But they can move through the balance. They can, you know, there's no reason to be restricted and be balanced at the same time. And your body is the key. And so I'm saying that the upper mind is going to get a lot of wisdom as you're able to integrate with your lower body in the sense of your abdominal center of mass. And we're going to address that next week because all of these, as I said, is cumulative. So I hope people listen to this, and I hope this is clear in the sense of being able to help them with their regular thought, whatever they're doing and everything, to be able to get something from this and consider things in a new way, because it's very challenging. We've been taught and brainwashed to not consider things in a new way, and we don't even know that. So that's my answer to the other guy that said it's all worthless. Well, you know, we need to reprogram and decondition ourselves, and just talking about it isn't going to work. The wisdom is already there, but we just need to understand it in a different way. So that's my stance on the topic. And I still hope...
Yeah, thank you, Aristo. And I think the gentleman whose comment you had, he's been listening to me from the beginning, and he makes some interesting comments from time to time. I'm sure he will listen to what you've had to say and pick up that you addressed his commentary. You have a beautiful day, and we will see you next week, and I think this is going to work really well just doing the audio part. So namaste, and thank you, Aristo.
Thank you, Ron.